The camera loved lies. Amara Lewis pressed record anyway. Soft light from a cheap ring light washed her studio apartment in a flattering glow. On screen, she became the girl the algorithm adored. Voice hushed, candles flickering behind her, a chipped mug of matcha cupped in both hands like it was worth more than rent. She told her followers it was a slow, soft morning in Los Angeles. She spoke about protecting their peace, easing anxious nervous systems, starting the day with gratitude. 3 things she was thankful for, she said, were rest, warmth, and tiny joys. Off-screen, the mug held supermarket green tea with almond milk bought on sale. The candle had been burned down to the label, and the list in her head had nothing to do with tiny joys. Noah's lungs had finally settled in the early hours. The power was still on. The Wi-Fi hadn't been cut, yet. She didn't say any of that into the camera. When she hit stop, the influencer version of herself slumped. The soft voice vanished. The ring light hummed in the silence as she padded down the narrow hallway to check on the only person who mattered more than the feed. Noah lay tangled in superhero sheets, curls flattened to one side, a faint whistle threaded through his breathing. He was 10 years old and already knew too much about pain scales and pill bottles. The medication lined up on his nightstand looked like a tiny plastic army, always on duty, never enough. He mumbled that his legs hurt. When she asked him to rate the pain, he gave her a number low enough to let her pretend they could still have a normal day. She filed it away with the 100 other calculations she made before breakfast. Could he walk? Could she work? Could they risk another absence at school? By the time she'd coaxed him through oatmeal and meds, her phone had already started its daily chorus. The school wanted a quick conversation about Noah's attendance. The message was wrapped in polite concern, but edged with words like patterns and procedures. To Amara's ears, it sounded dangerously close to social worker. The cafe manager followed a minute later, reminding her she was on shift at 9 and that there wouldn't be many more second chances if she kept cutting it close. Support, procedure, review. Everyone seemed to have a different word for watching her closely. At the bus stop, while Noah watched a dog bark itself hoarse at pigeons, she opened an email she'd been refreshing for all week. Glowhouse Beauty wanted her. They loved her soft life messaging, they said. They wanted her as the face of their Glow Without Worries campaign, a 3-month run of TikToks and Reels, all pale serums and dreamy mornings. The fee made her chest ache with something like hope. One contract could slow the avalanche of hospital bills and rent overdue notices. The brief was clear, though. No heavy themes, no money talk, no illness, nothing that might disturb the fantasy. They wanted her life to look effortless. She looked at her worn sneakers, at Noah's stiff, careful movements, at the bus that always seemed 10 minutes late. Effortless was the last word she would ever use. Still, she typed a professional yes. Survival came before honesty. At Brunch and Bloom, she slipped straight from big sister to barista. She arrived a few minutes late, cheeks flushed from running, and absorbed the manager's cool warning about schedules without protest. Then she tied on an apron and spent hours charming customers into oat milk upgrades and vanilla cold foam, as if their orders mattered more than the rent notice pulsing at the back of her mind. By the time she climbed the 3 flights back to their apartment, her feet ached, her throat hurt from being cheerful, and the hallway smelled like someone's overcooked onions. The envelope on the door stopped her cold. It was taped at her eye level, her name printed in neat, impersonal letters. For a heartbeat, she told herself it could be a building-wide memo or a flyer. Her hands shook as she peeled it off. Final notice of non-payment of rent. The balance was printed in a font that felt like shouting. The line about 7 days before eviction proceedings began made the floor tilt under her. Her world narrowed to that single sheet of paper, $3,840, and a deadline she had no idea how to meet. A voice in the hallway asked whether she was okay. She looked up and saw the man from 3B properly for the first time. Dark scrub pants, sneakers, a faded t-shirt under a hoodie, hospital badge clipped to his pocket, tired eyes that missed very little. She told him it was nothing, junk mail. She folded the notice in half and willed herself not to crumble in front of a stranger. Inside, the ring light still glowed dumbly by the window. The candle wax had hardened into a tired puddle. Noah's game console beeped faintly from his room. She locked the door, slid down it until she was sitting on the floor with her back against the wood, and pressed the eviction notice to her chest like it might stop her heart from falling out. Tomorrow, she promised herself she would turn the camera back on. She would smile and sell the dream. Tonight, she let the first sob tear loose in the dark. The crisis woke her a little after 2 a.m. Her name was a broken whisper from down the hall, the kind that yanked her from sleep before she understood why. The clock by her bed glowed 2:17 a.m. in harsh red. Noah was curled tight, clutching his legs, breath coming in, fast, shallow pulls. The air felt wrong. She'd learned to recognize the weight of it as easily as his voice. She touched his forehead and felt heat. The thermometer confirmed what her hands already knew: fever climbing. When she asked him to rate his pain this time, he didn't pretend. The number was as high as it could go. There was no space left for denial. The go bag lived by the couch now, always half-packed. She threw in extra clothes and the crumpled folder with his latest discharge papers. Shoes went on the wrong feet first try. The apartment door banged open as she tried to juggle her brother's weight and the keys with hands that would not stop shaking. She almost ran straight into the neighbor. He was in scrub pants again, hoodie thrown over a t-shirt, duffel slung across his body like he'd just come off a late shift. He took in the scene in a second: Noah's twisted posture, Amara's white-knuckled grip, the sheen of sweat on the boy's forehead. The medic in him surfaced before the neighbor. He asked about Noah's condition, fever, pain location, medication. The terms came easily to him, but he softened them when he saw how wide Noah's eyes were. When he heard sickle cell and 10 out of 10, his expression shifted from concern to urgency. He didn't waste time telling her she'd done the right thing. He simply said he was a pediatric nurse at County General and that he could help them get there faster and safer than she could manage on her own. She had just enough space left inside her panic to nod. In the back of the rideshare, the city blurred into streaks of traffic lights. Noah trembled with each bump. Amara held him as close as seatbelts allowed, whispering the useless reassurances all caregivers reach for. The neighbor, Eli, he'd said his name was, kept his voice low and steady, asking simple questions, keeping Noah talking just enough to keep him anchored. The emergency department was a familiar assault of fluorescent lights and antiseptic. Monitors beeped, someone argued at the triage desk, a baby wailed somewhere behind a curtain. Eli walked them straight to the nurse's station, his badge suddenly more than plastic and a clip. He translated Amara's halting description into the shorthand the staff needed: 10-year-old sickle cell patient, sudden severe pain, fever, likely crisis. It was the kind of language that moved people quickly. Within minutes, Noah was in a cubicle behind a thin curtain, small body swallowed by a hospital gown. He squeezed Amara's hand so hard her knuckles ached as the IV went in. She wished she could take the pain herself, wished there were more to offer than stories and a hand to hold. The morphine sagged his eyelids, his breathing evened out by degrees. The monitor settled into a rhythm that the staff all understood and that she had learned to dread. Dr. Patel arrived with a tablet and the controlled calm of someone who had seen too many nights like this. She asked about school, pain patterns, medication adherence, stress. The word stress felt like an accusation even when it wasn't meant that way. When the doctor suggested that a hospital social worker might be able to help with school accommodations, financial assistance, transportation, Amara's body reacted before her brain could catch up. Her shoulders locked, her jaw clenched. She heard terms like support and resources, but what her nervous system translated was assessment and judgment. She thought about truancy letters and CPS horror stories and how quickly help could turn into someone else deciding whether you were enough. By the time Dr. Patel moved on to her next patient, Amara was vibrating with a mix of fear, anger, and exhaustion. Outside the curtain, Eli waited. He hadn't gone home. He stood with his back to the wall, arms folded, like he was giving them privacy while still keeping watch. He asked if she was okay and got the expected answer. He didn't push, but he didn't disappear either. He could see, the way only someone who lived in pediatric wards could, how close she was to breaking under the weight of being the only adult in every room that mattered. Before he left to catch a few hours of sleep, he scribbled his number on a scrap of paper and pressed it into her palm. He told her, gently, that she didn't have to do every crisis alone, that if she ever needed someone to decode a lab result or sit with Noah for a few minutes, she could call. She said she wouldn't, but she kept the paper. Dawn found them stumbling back into the apartment, the hospital bracelet still on Noah's wrist, the go bag slumped by the door ready to go again at a moment's notice. Noah, soothed by meds and cartoons, claimed the couch. Amara stood in the middle of the living room, surrounded by evidence of 2 lives: ring light, bottles of gifted skincare, a rent notice folded too many times, a 10-year-old's shoes kicked off sideways. Her phone buzzed on the table. The notification was a reminder. Glow House call at 8:30. She had barely slept. Her brother had just been discharged, and a brand in a glass office wanted to talk about how effortless her life looked. She tucked the hospital bracelet under Noah's hoodie, slid the rent notice out of frame, and set up her laptop on the coffee table. The ring light came back on, erasing the worst of the night from her face in 12 volts of denial. Noah watched her the way kids who have seen too much watch adults, quietly, as if checking whether the world was about to tip again. She promised him cereal as soon as she got off the call and locked herself into her most convincing version of calm. When she clicked the Zoom link, her own tired reflection was replaced by a bright, spacious office on the other side of the city. 2 women appeared in perfect lighting, framed by plants and a neon sign that read, "Glow Different." They spoke in easy marketing shorthand about brand pillars and aspirational aesthetics. They told her she was the embodiment of cozy luxury, that her feed felt attainable, but still aspirational. They laid out the campaign vision: 3 months of content built on the idea that women like her could live without worrying. No mentions of bills, no hints of illness, just soothing shots of her taking care of herself in beautiful light. They wanted her life to be the fantasy their followers escaped into. As they talked, Amara's gaze drifted just for a heartbeat to the edge of her laptop screen. If the camera slipped even an inch, the crumpled eviction notice and the hospital bag would slide into view. The room seemed to tilt again. She drew in a breath, mind racing through every version of an answer: professional agreement, polite pushback, outright refusal. Every path had a cost. Her lips parted. Before she could choose, her phone lit up beside the laptop, vibrating against the table. A new notification flashed across the screen from a number she didn't recognize. School, hospital, landlord, neighbor, social services. Whoever it was, whatever it said, had the power to turn the life she was selling on screen into a lie she could no longer pretend to manage. If you're already rooting for this exhausted big sister who is one step from losing everything and still showing up anyway, the full story is waiting for you right now on amplereads.com. Go read what happens when the soft life finally collides with the truth, and whether anyone is there to catch her when the lie falls apart.